This video is going to be showing you the steps that I took to create these two journals that were made by sewing on cords. So here is the first stages of creating these journals. What's happened so far is digital pages were created, printed out, folded into signatures. Then I put this in the press and I sawed in with this little coping saw a channel and used thin cords so that I can have a smooth back on this. I'm going to put some linings on here and get this nice and smooth. There won't be any raised cords on this particular journal. You can probably see as I've lifted this up that I've got these long strings, and these are left over because I haven't sewn in the made end papers because I wanted to show you how that works. So in the end paper here, I glued one side of this end paper to a folio, folded piece of the paper, the inside text paper. Then I will nestle another piece of decorative paper or text paper in here, and the sewing will go through here. No holes will be made in the end papers, and this will be sewn onto the text block. And my other journal that I'm making already has that sewn on. In addition, with this one, because of some things I want to do, I wanted to be sure to have what's called a waste sheet that gets torn off at the end and isn't part of the book in the final measure. I wanted that on here to protect the decorative paper. This particular text block was sewn on double cords because I am going to do what's called a tight back binding, where the leather will actually be glued to the spine. There will be some lining material between the cords to hold the book in its shape, but ultimately the leather will go over these cords and they will be visible on the outside of the book. This one, once again, had decorative papers. If you're a fan of Witcher, you immediately recognize that this is a Witcher book. In addition to the steps of sewing up the text block, creating the end sheets or end papers, and sewing them on, you also do something where you line the boards that you will be using, and the purpose of that is to create this slight bend here where the board is actually warped from pasting the paper on. And that is to counteract the pull of the leather that will pull in the opposite direction, and the board will ultimately be flat. Right now it's curved. I'm doing something or attempting something that I haven't done before when I've sewn on cords. I've only done this technique when I've done a cased in binding, but on the Witcher book I wanted to create a board that would accept this little 3D print thing that my son made for me. And it's a little confusing. You can see a bunch of markups here. This line and this line represent the width of similar books that I have made of the board, because I wanted to be sure that I had enough board structure here. This will actually be the spine edge of the book. And so the top piece I cut out something that would accept this, plus I laid some of the leather here and pushed it down to be sure that there was room for the leather to be on there. You don't throw this away. This is a very important piece, because when you have put your leather on and you're waiting for it to dry, you want to be able to put downward pressure here to keep it all adhered, and you use this piece to put in there to push the leather down with weight so that it adheres properly. We'll see you in a minute. Okay, before going into describing these next steps, I wanted to briefly back up and talk about the sewing, because as you saw, we had one book that was sewn with the cords down in a channel so that they would be pretty flat, and one where the cords were above to be shown on the flexible binding. And there is a difference in the sewing. When you're sewing a book with the channels where you want the cord to be hidden, you come up in the hole to the side that you're sewing from, go over and down, and that effectively pulls the cord into that channel and flattens it as much as it can. On this other one, when you come out the hole that's poked with an awl, you go to the far side, you go around the cord and back in the hole. And that puts some thread to fill up the hole so that the cord is not pulled down in and tearing the hole. It's actually sitting on top of the hole. So that's just a little something about the sewing. Sometimes the diagrams in the books are a little confusing, and I hope that that helps you out. So here we have one of the books in the next stage. This is the one that was sewn on double cords that are going to be visible through the flexible back binding. I'm going to flip it over, because what I did after I showed you the last time is that I lined the spine with a little bit of fabric, the fray knot, which you cannot see, in order to be able to sew on the headbands here. And then I put a little bit of paper over the spine to disguise any lumps from the tie downs from the end bands. I frayed out the cords so they, they look pretty frayed, and I prepared the board for lacing on. And what that is you come in 10 millimeters from the edge and you poke your holes that you've lined up here. And then on the reverse side, you come in 20 millimeters and you come down at a 45-degree angle and poke your second hole. You want to poke them from the reverse sides because you want this material that explodes out to be going the correct direction, so that you can thread what is now called the slips instead of cords, the slips, in and out. Because these are double cords and very thick, I had to, in addition to the little channel that you cut, and in this instance, unlike the previous book that was a little straight line because it was a tape, which is rectangular, this is in a little V. And on this side, there's a little bit of material removed between the two holes so that there's some place for the slips to be hammered down. And in this one that's finished, you can see that it hammers down into there so that this is pretty smooth here. So this is ready to be laced on. The other side is laced on, and when I went to let this dry, it's only glued right now. There's a little bit of paste put in here and a little bit of paste put in the hole, but not in the channel. The channel is still loose. You can probably see here. And so you are gluing this up in basically two stages. The lacing on stage, and then later when you not glue, I keep saying glue, but it's actually wheat paste. When you put the paste in there and put it down, it's called setting the squares, because that pasting in fixes where the board sits. And once again, I have saved this little piece so that when I put the leather on, I can put that in there to apply pressure. I'll have to sand off a little bit of material here on this so that the leather will actually fit in. Another thing that I wanted to demonstrate is I have these tins here, just cut out of some metal my husband had, And that's important to have something like that, or maybe even just a board, when you're putting this in the press, because these little pieces of the slip will put an indentation or impression into your text block, and you really don't want that. So that's just a couple of things there. This one is further along. It's got a little hole here, and this little hole is to accept this little guy, which you'll see more later. But this has already been pasted up here, so those don't flop out anymore. So the squares are set. I took a right angle and made sure that all of this was even all around before I put it in the press, once again with the tins in there, but it's done on both sides. And this one has the smooth back, and let's see if we can see it here. It has the hollow tube on the side, which I hope you can see is opening up there. So this is all capped up, ready for leather. The other one still has to have the other board laced on, and then the square set on both sides. So next will be the final result. So today we're going to see the final result of my 2 different books sewn on cords, and I will start with the Asian inspired one. The reason I was doing this one was because the Graphics Fairy membership site had come out with several bundles that were complimentary and kind of interesting, and those included their Japanese garden and the Lotus and Water Lilies set. They had previously done one called Watercolor Spots that I used to create the kind of background pages. This has some of my marble paper in the front, and then just a dragon. And this is the watercolor spot paper. They had a series of water spots, and I just layered them up to get some interesting background papers. But then there you see one of the items from the Japanese garden, and this was actually supposed to be a microscope slide in the ephemera portion, and I just enlarged it and made it into a border. I did something similar further into the book. Here's 4 of them together in the middle. Probably should have put those on the outside edges, but well, live and learn. This was a frame that was part of the group. And then they also had some watercolor paintings, and I incorporated those. This is from the Lotus and Water Lilies. This is mainly a writing journal, so most of the pages are sort of blank. But yeah, there's some more pretty images from the Japanese garden set. In their ephemera, they had a couple of different pre-designed journal pages, and that's one of them. And that's the other side. Let's see here. That's from the Lotus and Water Lily. It was supposed to be a card that you folded in half, and I just resized it and made it for half of the page, and its companion was on that side. Some more of the watercolor and lily background paper, and then I just put from their paper ephemera a blank page on top. I thought that was really a pretty image, so I didn't mess with it. But that's the end of that book. You had seen me make the recess. This is actually an epoxy figure from a mold, a silicone mold, and into the epoxy was mixed some Pearlex powder in a bronzy color, and then to highlight some of these areas I used some gold and bronze Gilders Wax. This is the Witcher book. This was a little 3D printed item that my son made me. I painted it first black and then put Gilders Wax on it. The leather was natural goat, which is beige, and I first dyed it with purple dye, and it was just kind of bland, so I'm hoping that you're seeing some of the bronzy browny colors that I sprinkled on it just to give it a little bit of age. This is a tight back binding, so this leather is glued straight to the spine, and those are the actual cords you can see coming down into the cover that the book was sewn on. Again, some of my marble paper, and then just again a lot of writing paper using some of the symbols for the different chapters of the Witcher series on TV that I enjoyed watching, and then some various collage pages. I'll just try to get to the collage pages. I used some things from Medieval Mirage and some items, actually photographs, and then I had taken some screenshots of various characters and put them through Photoshop and altered them into kind of a cartoonish version of the character. And those of you who watch the series recognize these folks. But it was a lot of fun to do little bits and pieces of the characters from literally an iPhone screenshot, and then this Medieval Mirage papers and castle-y kind of things. So it's fun to create your own books and put various items in it, and I hope you will try that. I can tell you that having sewn on both tapes and cords, that probably the tapes are the easiest, and with the cords here, the hollow back binding is probably my favorite. This book is a lot tighter opening because the leather is glued to the spine, and probably will be a little more difficult to write in because it's not going to want to give as easily. So that would be my thoughts in the side-by-side comparison of creating these together. Have a wonderful day. See you later.